We've got East Baton Rouge Parish Coroner Dr. Beau Clark in studio. Got a couple things to talk about. We're going to get to the annual report in a little bit, but good morning, sir. How are you?
Oh, fine, thanks.
Glad to have you on here today. If I could tease the annual report, fentanyl deaths were actually down.
Yeah, just by 15 or 16 deaths. So we're still living in the triple-digit numbers, which is not good.
No, but any break in the clouds, I mean, any inkling that this wasn't going to be another record, because what did we have, 4 record years in a row?
They kept climbing incrementally with
Yeah.
2021 being the worst ever.
Okay.
And then we've had a little dip. What I'm worried about is if you go back and we look at the 11-year trend, we had a scenario like this before where we had a high year and then we had a slight dip the next year and then we were off to the races after that. So is this just a little blip? Only time will tell.
Yeah, I guess I just cling to it because what else is there, you know?
Right.
Before we get into the annual report, though, let's talk a little bit about Nathan Millard. Walk me through as much as you can share. You're into the investigation.
Yeah, so our investigation always begins with a scene investigation that then ends up in an autopsy, in a case like this. At autopsy, we were able to discern that there were no signs of internal or external trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes people say, what does that mean? Well, of course, that means that we didn't find any gunshot wounds or stab wounds and other types of trauma, both internally and externally. And then from there, we send samples off for toxicology. Unfortunately, because folks are into watching Netflix shows about real crime and all these NCIS things, they think toxicology happens real fast. It doesn't.
It does. It comes back before the hours.
Right, at the commercial break, usually. But that's not the case in the real world. And because of the opioid epidemic, the 2 forensic toxicology labs in the country that most everybody is using are inundated. They're inundated not only with what we're seeing here in East Baton Rouge Parish, but what the rest of Louisiana is seeing, what the country's seeing. So the time frame I have seen over a decade increased from a few weeks to a few months. And so we wait patiently. I mean, certainly in this case, there was a lot of public need for information, and so we put a lot of pressure on them to speed things up, and they did. I will say they did respond with getting a result back to us quickly.
Well, yeah, you and I talked or traded texts a couple weeks ago, and you were saying roughly 10 weeks was the expectation.
Yes.
So all things considered, this got in a good 5 weeks ahead of time.
It did.
Yeah.
And that was because we were probably hounding them every day that we needed to get this result out because it was what the law enforcement needed as far as their investigation goes, but it was also the public was really wanting the answers, and especially the family.
What did those reports tell us?
So we found that it was the toxicology had fentanyl, alcohol, and cocaine in his system, and that's what the ultimate cause of death was a result of the toxicity of those drugs.
Are you able to tell how much?
Yeah, so sometimes we can and sometimes we can't. It depends on the sample. If we have a blood sample, we can do quantitative toxicology that's really, really accurate. In this case, we had to use tissue toxicology.
Okay.
Although we do get a quantitative number in that, the science behind that is a little slightly different than, like, for example, you hear people often talk about blood alcohol.
Yeah.
And that's a very accurate in-time number. When we do tissue toxicology, we get a similar quantitative figure, but the science is different in its explanation.
Well, and the reason I ask about amounts is because he was kicked out of Happy's at 11:30 p.m. because he was too drunk to be served.
Correct. Yeah.
So were we able to tell like where he was at blood alcohol?
Yeah, we can tell all that. We're not going to release that because if
Fair.
there's any potential court case, that's when that will come out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess that would also be true for the amounts of cocaine
Correct.
and fentanyl
Correct.
as well.
Yes.
One of the questions that I've had about this, and I honestly don't know if you can answer it or not, is there any way to tell from your office's perspective, be that your investigation or the toxicology reports, whether or not this was ruled an accidental overdose?
Correct.
Right? Okay. Is there any way to tell whether or not he knew what he was taking?
Yeah, so that becomes very challenging for us, not only as coroners but also the law investigation part of this is making that determination. Clearly, if I had information that someone held you down, Ryan, and forced drugs into your system and it caused your death, then that would not be an accident. That would be on purpose,
right?
And which changes things to a homicide.
Well,
so I have to have definitive information in order to make that call. Now, remember, that is the manner of death as reported by a coroner or a medical examiner, and there are only 5 manners of death: homicide, suicide, accident, undetermined, and natural.
Right.
However, that does not hinder law enforcement or the district attorney's office from bringing charges against a person.
Okay.
And so I'm on the front end where those charges become on the back end, right? The judicial process.
Well,
And so they could take an accidental death and charge somebody with a murder for sure.
well, the way you said, though, held him down and forced him to take it, I'm not thinking that scenario. We're going to talk about this annual report in a minute.
Yes.
And you're going to tell me that how many fentanyl deaths are actually fentanyl being laced into other drugs.
Correct.
So if I'm Nathan Millard and I'm looking for cocaine, but I get cocaine laced with fentanyl,
Right.
that proves deadly. He didn't know what he was getting, and there's no way for any report to tell us that.
So yes, right. A toxicology report's not going to tell you that. So I have two entities that could potentially have that information, and one of them is deceased.
Right.
So therefore, you run into a how do you know?
Yeah, because at that point you're left to believe the alleged drug dealer.
Correct.
Right? That's the
Who
only
likely is not going to tell you
right
the truth.
right.
Because the
So-
truth would get them in trouble.
Well, yeah. So yeah, what you're left with is the accidental overdose.
Correct.
How much more is still to come from your office? Yes, I understand courtroom wise, yes, but
So
how much more
from our office, we're completed with the investigation with the information that we have in front of us.
Mhm.
As a coroner, though, in any case, I can go back and look at cases again if new information is presented. So at any point, if we have new information, we'll certainly reopen the case and address it. So now we're in a waiting mode to see what the needs of the district attorney's office and law enforcement will be from us from a testimony standpoint.
We've got coroner Dr. Beau Clark in studio. Let's move on to the annual report
Okay.
because there's always more than a segment's worth of information to come out of it. Give me a few of the big ticket items within here. What did we learn?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the biggest thing to understand is that even though our overdose numbers were down this year, we went from 311 to 295. I don't want people to have a false sense of security that we're out of the woods. We're still dealing with triple-digit overdoses, the majority of which are a result of fentanyl. Even now, seeing trends that are the result of fentanyl being adulterated into other drugs such as cocaine, methamphetamine, and marijuana. So it creates a much more deadly and fatal environment. Our overall death investigations were slightly down this year, but when I look back over the 11 years that I've been coroner, I've done over 40,000 death investigations. So we have a tremendous amount of volume, but we're a big parish, and that's to be expected. The majority of that 40,000, of course, is natural, which is really what you want for your community, is for there to be natural death, not unnatural death. It's the unnatural death that we get worried about.
With the fentanyl number down, we were talking about this a little bit during the break, but I think it's worth sharing with the entire audience. Is if I see fentanyl numbers down, hey, it's whoa, hey, they're down. Is there a way to track why?
Yeah, so not really. We have seen a blip like this before, where we were on an upward trend, and then we had a slight decrease one year, and then the next year we were off to the races, and that's when we kind of ended up in the triple-digit scenario. So I'm not really sure what it means that it's down 16 cases, but there certainly is the high potential that we then start off and we're bigger than we ever have been this year.
Is there? I don't even want to ask this because I don't want to open the Pandora's box.
Sure.
But is there anything beyond fentanyl that's on the radar yet?
No, well, there always is. I mean, certainly now we're seeing a trend, and recently I think it's been reported on this thing called tranq, where they take a elephant tranquilizer, a large veterinarian tranquilizer, and mix it with fentanyl. I don't really know why that would be the case, but they do. And so we've had some deaths that are related to that. It's called xylazine is the chemical name for it. So that's certainly present in this community as well. So not only did you have to worry about your fentanyl being in your drugs, but now you have to worry about fentanyl and xylazine. And certainly these chemists are coming up with more and more things every day that we are combating and we're finding in these tox screens that are leading to people's death.
Wait, first of all, you forgot to air quote chemist.
Correct. Yes.
But,
right.
But secondly, where would one go to find elephant tranquilizer?
Oh, it's a veterinary thing. I mean, it's something
Yeah.
you can make in a lab, and so they, I don't know why they would put this stuff in there, but they do. They do.
I mean, goodness gracious, that's okay. That's what we're doing these days. The drug overdose deaths are one part of it. What else is in the report that we need to know?
Yeah. So the other good news I think on the horizon is we really track infant deaths related to unsafe sleeping. That was down by one number. Over the last several years, we've been in a trend where we've been less than 10 deaths. These deaths are very important because they really can be zero if you follow the proper steps on how to sleep an infant, which is alone on their back and in a crib. And you don't put them in an unsafe sleeping environment. An unsafe sleeping environment would be you put them in an adult-sized bed with a bunch of pillows and blankets,
right.
or you sleep with them yourself as, with an adult or an older child, and there's a rollover phenomena. So we still want to work very diligently with our Safe Sleep Task Force, which includes my office and local law enforcement, to get that number to zero. That's our goal.
So, yeah, how attainable is that? Because when you said down by 1, I think it's important to note the hard number. Down from 7 to 6.
Yes.
Which, I mean, like you said, you want to be down to 0, but 6 over the course of a year, I mean, how does it stack up?
Well, it's 6 over the course of a year in a death category that is 100% preventable, meaning it really can be
No,
0. That is an obtainable number if the rules are followed.
Well, we went from 12 down to 7,
yes.
then down to 6.
Correct, and at one time we were almost to 20.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, that's alarming as well. The coroner, Dr. Beau Clark, is our guest. We're talking about his office's annual report. Opioid deaths we've already covered. But your office does a lot of stuff that does not involve just straight up death. I mean, there's a number of other categories as well.
Yeah, we have 2 other jurisdictions. One has to do with mental health, or the involuntary committal of the mentally ill. We've seen those numbers remain pretty stable over the years. However, they always kind of creep up just a little bit, where we're doing nearly 10,000 cases a year of these committals. And then, of course, our sexual assault program, which is it's an old jurisdiction, but it's new because it was revamped in the mid-portion of 2015, 2016, where the Louisiana legislature rewrote some laws on how it's managed. And so we manage the region, and so we've seen our numbers grow through our sexual assault nurse examiner program. So now we can assure that in this parish and our surrounding parishes in our region, that anybody that is a victim of a sexual assault gets a very comprehensive forensic collection of evidence that is the gold standard for the United States. It's happening right here in Baton Rouge.
Sticking with the mental health for just a second, the Bridge Center for Hope has been open for a couple of years
yes.
now. Not numbers-wise, your opinion-wise, are they showing some impact?
Yeah, so I think when we add more opportunity to the community, if you think about how the Bridge Center came to be, we lost Earl K. Long. That was a receiving facility. Right after that, we lost Baton Rouge General Mid-City. That was a receiving facility. So you're reducing the number of beds and opportunities for people to seek mental health care. And so the Bridge Center came along as a result to expand that, especially in a parish that wasn't getting smaller. It's a parish that's getting bigger.
Right.
So taking away numbers is never a good idea. You need to add to it. Of course, we could probably build several Bridge Centers and still not have the capacity to manage the volume.
And that's going to be forever frustrating as well. Dr. Beau Clark is our guest for another couple minutes. On the sexual assault category, that's a number that is trending in the wrong direction.
It is, and we've seen that over the course of time. As a result, at first, the number had to grow because we started out when we were doing our initial phases of our sexual assault nurse examiner program. We did adults only, okay, and we were tracking those numbers. Then we lowered the age limit to 12, and we did kind of that adolescent age limit. Now we're down all the way into the pediatric volume. So some of those numbers might shift because we're expanded our services to more people. And over the next year or so, we will have a true hard number and line on that, because we'll have several years of doing 0 to death.
Well, and this is one where there's going to be a lot of unknowns here as well, because even if the number goes up, is that an indicator that it's happening more, or that it's just being reported finally?
Correct, and that's something that's hard to know, right? Because you don't know about it if it's not reported.
Right.
But if it is reported, we're called out, and we do our work into collecting that evidence, and that's 0 to death now, so that we're covering the whole gamut of every individual.
We got about 2.5 minutes left with Coroner Dr. Beau Clark. I want to ask about the 2022 report and where we're at with COVID-19.
Yeah, so our COVID-19 numbers have drastically dropped off. They're not in the report. You can find them on the website. Yeah, so if you go on our website, you'll see, of course, we had 2 significant years, year 1 and year 2, where we saw around 500, 550 deaths each year. Since then, it's dropped lower than that. We still, on occasion, do see a COVID-19 death. But, now we've got a society that's not only been exposed and naturally immune, but also vaccinated and immune passively as well. So you now have, we're better prepared to manage an infectious disease because of that. And so I think you'll still see those numbers dwindle down. You got to remember, when we go back and look at it, the mortality rate for COVID was less than 1%. which is way better than if we think about what happened in 2000, 2002 with SARS. That had a 30% mortality rate, which is really significant. So, I think we're trending in the right direction. It's still something to be wary of. I mean, obviously, there's an infectious disease in our community that has the potential to cause your death, and you have to choose what's right between you and your physician as far as what you need to do to protect yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, we have a coworker who's out right now with it. So,
yeah.
Statewide, there's still about 35 to 40 deaths per week from COVID.
Yeah.
How many of or attributed to COVID? How many of those, on average, are here in EBR? Are we still looking at? I mean,
yeah, I think our number here in EBR is pretty low. I'm trying to think back over the last couple of weeks, and we might have had one or two in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So we're not seeing it certainly at the volume we were seeing where we had 10 or 12 a day in the height of the pandemic.
Yeah, and at the height of the pandemic, there was such a struggle where, because coroners declare the cause of death.
Correct.
And for all coroners across the nation to get on the same standard, that took a minute.
Well, the good news is we create a standard here in Louisiana. So I would say with certainty 99% of the coroners in Louisiana were using the standard that we created. When we got outside the state of Louisiana, who knows? So
he is Coroner Dr. Beau Clark. I appreciate the time and the information, both about the Millard case and the annual report. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Here's ABC News.